Picture this. Saturday evening, 1974. The whole family is squeezed around a single television set in a cramped apartment in the Ruhrgebiet. ARD is showing the World Cup final, Germany against the Netherlands. Your father hasn't said a word in 20 minutes. Your mother is pretending not to care, but she hasn't touched her knitting. And you're sitting on the floor because there aren't enough chairs, watching Gerd Müller in glorious black and white, because your family couldn't afford a color TV yet. If you grew up in a working-class home in 1970s West Germany, you know exactly what that felt like. You remember the coal stove, the catalog dreams, the Sunday roast that had to stretch. I've got 15 of those moments in this video, and every single one is going to take you right back. Your mother didn't call you in for dinner, or the streetlights did. No mobile phones, no helicopter parenting, no playdates arranged 3 weeks in advance. She opened the kitchen window and shouted one word, your name. That was it. Until then, you were somewhere between the Hinterhof, the playground, and 3 streets you weren't technically allowed to cross. Fangenspielen, Verstecken, gum-a-twist with the girls, Fußball until it got so dark you could barely see the ball. And here's the thing, every mother on that street was watching. Not just her own kids. Everyone's. If you stepped out of line near the bakery, Frau Schneider would give you a look that could freeze water, and she'd tell your mother before you even got home. You thought you were free. You weren't. You just didn't know it. Was that television you rushed home to watch was probably the most expensive thing in your apartment. A new color set in the early 70s cost around 2,000 Deutsche Marks. That's more than 2 months' wages for a factory worker. So most families watched in black and white until well into the decade. 3 channels, ARD, ZDF, and your regional program. The whole family gathered around one screen. When Ein Herz und eine Seele came on, everyone watched Ekel Alfred together, whether you liked it or not. And when something went wrong with the television, which happened more than you'd think, your father didn't call a repairman. He fixed it himself. Or at least, he tried. The back panel came off. Tools appeared from a drawer that held everything from screwdrivers to old batteries to things nobody could identify anymore. He'd poke around inside, mutter something about tubes and wires, and sometimes the picture came back. If it didn't, the television sat broken until payday, because your father fixed everything. Whether it actually worked afterward was another question. The toaster, the radio, the Simca that coughed every winter morning. Shelves that weren't quite straight, wallpaper that didn't quite meet in the corners. Das hält schon. That'll hold, the unofficial motto of every working-class household. Speaking of holding things together, let's talk about winter, about waking up and seeing your breath in your own bedroom. Ice on the inside of the window, not outside, inside. Working-class apartments in the 70s weren't centrally heated. You had a Kachelofen in the living room, maybe an oil heater if you were lucky, and nothing in the bedrooms. The warmth stopped at the hallway. Getting undressed at night took courage. You'd strip fast, pull on pajamas that felt like they'd been stored in a freezer, and dive under a mountain of blankets. 2, maybe 3, plus a federbet that weighed more than you did. In the morning, getting out of bed was an act of heroism. You'd grab your clothes and sprint to the warm room, fighting your siblings for the spot closest to the heater. Nobody complained. Every apartment on the street was the same. And those apartments, let me tell you about the Mietskazerne. 5 floors, no elevator, a shared toilet on the landing if you were unlucky. Thin walls where you could hear Herr Müller's television, Frau Weber's arguments, and someone's baby crying at 3 in the morning. Privacy was a foreign concept, but so was loneliness. Someone always knew if you were sick, if you needed help, if something was wrong. When it came to buying things for those apartments, you didn't go to a department store. You went to the catalog, Quelle, Neckermann, Otto. If your family had one of those enormous books sitting on the Wohnzimmertisch, you know exactly what I mean. That catalog was thicker than a telephone directory and twice as heavy. It had everything: clothes, furniture, toys, electronics, and you didn't pay up front. You paid in monthly installments. Ratenzahlung, the magical word that made impossible things possible. Before Christmas, that toy section got more attention than anything on television. You'd lie on the carpet, flipping through pages, circling things you wanted, the electric train, the big Jim action figure, the new Barbie, knowing that most of those circles would stay dreams, but 1 or 2, maybe. If you'd been good, if money wasn't too tight, if the factory hadn't announced Kurzarbeit again. The factory. That's where your father disappeared to every morning before you woke up, and where he came back from smelling like machine oil and cigarettes. The Ruhrgebiet, the Saarland, Stuttgart, Wolfsburg, wherever the work was, coal mines, steel mills, automotive plants, 8 hours, sometimes 10, sometimes night shifts that turned day into night and night into day. And he wasn't alone anymore. By the 70s, the factories were filling with Gastarbeiter, guest workers. First the Italians, then the Greeks, then the Turks. Your father worked alongside men named Giuseppe and Dimitri and Mehmet, men who'd left everything behind to stand at the same assembly line. At first, people kept their distance. Different language, different food, different everything. But somewhere between the shift changes and the cafeteria lunches, something shifted. Your father started bringing home words you'd never heard. And one day, there was a donor stand on the corner that hadn't been there before. But let's talk about the money he brought home. Your mother could stretch a Deutsche Mark further than physics should allow. Kartoffelsuppe on Monday. Resti from Sunday's roast turned into something new on Tuesday. Bread and schmaltz if things got tight toward the end of the month. Königsberger Klopse made with half the meat the recipe called for, but somehow still filling enough. Eintopf that fed 6 from a pot that looked too small. Nothing was wasted. Vegetable scraps went into the next soup. Stale bread became arme Ritter. The heel of the wurst was fried with eggs. These women didn't have cooking shows or fancy ingredients. They had a gas stove, a pressure cooker, and 5 hungry mouths that needed feeding by 5 o'clock. And they managed it every single day. The clothes you wore almost certainly belonged to someone else first. Hand-me-downs weren't embarrassing. They were normal. Trousers went from older brother to younger brother to the cousin across town. School uniforms did the rounds of the entire neighborhood. Your mother patched the knees, let out the hems, took them up again, and somehow made everything last another year. You didn't have a wardrobe full of choices. You had what fitted and what was clean, and that was enough. Sunday was different. Sunday was Sonntagsbraten. There's the one day of the week when meat wasn't rationed by necessity. Pork roast with rotkohl and klöße, sour braten if it was a special occasion. The smell filling the entire apartment, drifting into the hallway, letting every neighbor know that today, we eat well. After dinner, cake, Marmorkuchen or Bienenstich, baked Saturday afternoon, saved for Sunday Kaffee und Kuchen, with Oma if she lived close enough to visit. Now, if your family was careful with money, really careful, there was one place that saw more traffic than the bank, the Pfandhaus, the pawn shop. Your father's good watch would go in on Monday when cash ran short. Sometimes your mother's ring. They'd come back out on Friday when the wages arrived. Week after week, the same ritual. In by Monday, out by Friday. It wasn't shameful, it was survival. Half the families on your street were doing exactly the same thing, and nobody talked about it. That's just how you got through the week. And if summer came and your family could afford to go anywhere, it wasn't to Spain, it wasn't to Italy. It was a campsite at the Ostsee, or a week in a tiny Ferienwohnung in the Schwarzwald, packed into a car that had no air conditioning, windows down, your father chain-smoking with one hand on the wheel, fighting for a spot on the Autobahn between the Mercedes that passed you like you were standing still. The destination didn't matter as much as the escape. 1 week where your father wasn't at the factory, 1 week where your mother didn't count Pfennige, 1 week where you could run around until dark, eat ice cream from the Eisdiele, and fall asleep with sand still between your toes. Yeah, plenty of families didn't go anywhere at all. A Sonntagsausflug to the nearest lake was the summer holiday. Pack a picnic, ride the Straßenbahn to the end of the line, swim in water that wasn't quite clean but nobody cared. Or maybe your family had a Schrebergarten, a tiny plot on the edge of town with a shed barely big enough to store tools, and a patch of earth where your father grew tomatoes and your mother grew beans. On summer weekends, you'd spend entire days there, running between the garden plots, eating strawberries straight from the plant, pretending the little shed was a castle or a spaceship. It wasn't a real garden, it wasn't a real vacation, but it was yours, and that was enough. Because when you've got nothing to compare it to, a day at the lake feels like the whole world. Oh, and one more thing. Like those glass bottles you drank your limo from? They were worth money. Real money. 10 Pfennig here, 20 Pfennig there. You'd search the neighborhood, check behind benches in the park, knock on neighbors' doors asking if they had Leergut. A bag full of bottles meant enough for Süßigkeiten at the kiosk. Or if you saved long enough, maybe that toy from the catalog that nobody thought you'd ever get. Kids today will never understand the hustle of bottle collecting, but you do. You remember the weight of those bottles in a plastic bag, the clink they made, and the satisfaction of watching the shopkeeper count out your coins. If anything in this video brought back a memory, I want to hear about it. Tell me which one hit you the hardest. Tell me if your Oma made the same Eintopf. Tell me if your father tried to fix things that probably should have been left alone. Because here's the truth about growing up working class in 1970s Germany. You didn't have much, but you had family squeezed into small rooms. You had neighbors who watched out for you. You had Sunday roasts and catalog dreams and summer days that lasted forever. Some childhoods you never forget. If you grew up the same way, subscribe to keep these stories alive and send this to someone who remembers, because they'll understand.